Sure. Here's the expanded version of Rahim, Part 100. In simple, natural language with a human-centric tone, the goal is to make it engaging and relatable while keeping everything clean and policy-friendly. The day started like any other for Captain Daniel Harper. He wasn't flying this time. He was just another passenger on a commercial flight from New York to Los Angeles. After spending hours piloting cargo planes through the night sky, he finally had some downtime. It felt good to sit back, stretch out his legs, and let someone else take control of the aircraft for once. Daniel wasn't your typical airline traveler. With decades of experience as a pilot under his belt, he had seen it all. The chaos of stormy landings, the tension of mechanical failures, and even the occasional drama among passengers. But today seemed quiet. At least, that's what he thought when he boarded the plane and settled into his first-class seat by the window. He glanced around at the familiar luxury of first class: plush leather seats, warm lighting, and attentive flight attendants ready to serve drinks or snacks at a moment's notice. Across the aisle sat two people who caught his eye almost immediately. One was a sharply dressed man in an expensive suit. His posture screamed confidence, but there was something about him that made Daniel uneasy. Maybe it was the way he tapped, his fingers impatiently on the armrest like he owned the place. Or maybe it was the dismissive look he gave the flight attendant when she offered him a glass of water. The second person was a young woman sitting directly across from the man. She looked different from everyone else in first class. While most passengers wore designer clothes or flashy accessories, she carried herself simply, a notebook resting on her lap, a pen tucked behind her ear, and a calm expression that hinted at focus rather than relaxation. Something about her intrigued Daniel. Was she traveling for work? A writer, perhaps? Whatever her story was, she seemed out of place next to the man in the fancy suit. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Passengers chatted quietly, flipping through magazines or scrolling on their phones. The hum of engines filled the cabin as the plane taxied down the runway and lifted off smoothly into the morning sky. Daniel leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a brief nap. But before he could drift off, a sharp voice cut through the peaceful atmosphere. "You've got some nerve," the man in the suit said loudly, glaring at the woman across from him. Everyone turned to look, curious about what was happening. Even Daniel opened his eyes, surprised by the sudden outburst. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she met the man's gaze steadily, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just doing my job," she replied. "If you have a problem with it, maybe you should address the facts instead of attacking me personally." It didn't take long for Daniel to piece together what was going on. This wasn't a casual disagreement, it was personal. From the snippets of conversation floating across the aisle, it sounded like the man was upset about something the woman had written. A journalist, then. That explained the notebook and pen. And the man, probably someone who didn't like being called out for questionable behavior. As the argument grew louder, Daniel couldn't help but feel a mix. Daniel couldn't help but feel a mix of irritation and curiosity. He didn't want to eavesdrop. Years of flying had taught him that minding your own business was often the best policy. But it was hard not to listen, when the man's voice carried over the hum of the plane's engines. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" the man in the suit snapped, leaning forward in his seat. His face was flushed, and his tone dripped with sarcasm. "Writing, those lies about people who actually contribute to society. Do you even know what it takes to run a company? To create jobs?" The woman didn't back down. She folded her hands on her lap, her expression calm but firm. "I'm not here to debate ethics with you," she said evenly. "What I wrote is based on facts. If you have evidence to prove otherwise, go ahead and present it. But shouting won't change the truth." Her words only seemed to fuel the man's anger. He gestured wildly with his hands, his voice rising another notch. "Facts? You call twisting information facts? That article cost me millions. Millions, do you understand that?" By now, the entire first-class cabin was watching. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Others exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Even the flight attendants hesitated, torn between maintaining professionalism and stepping in to defuse the situation. Daniel sighed inwardly. He'd seen plenty of heated arguments in his life, both on and off planes, but this one felt different. There was something raw and personal about it, like the two of them weren't just debating an issue, they were fighting over deeply held beliefs. And while Daniel generally preferred to keep out of other people's conflicts, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was escalating too quickly. He glanced at the man again. His knuckles were white as he gripped the armrest, his jaw clenched, tight. Whatever this argument was about, it clearly meant a lot to him. But the woman wasn't backing down either. She sat upright, her posture relaxed yet resolute, like someone who'd faced tougher opponents before. That's when Daniel decided to step in, not because he wanted to play hero, but because he could see where this was headed. Arguments like these rarely ended well, especially in close quarters like an airplane. Someone needed to break the tension before it spiraled out of control. Leaning slightly across the aisle, Daniel cleared his throat. Both the man and the woman turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from anger to surprise. "Excuse me," Daniel began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I don't mean to interrupt, but maybe we can all take a step back here. We've got a long flight ahead, and I'm sure none of us wants to spend it listening to raised voices." The man frowned, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Who are you supposed to be?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "This isn't your business." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "You're right, it's not my business," he admitted. "But if we're being honest, neither is whatever disagreement you two are having. Why don't we try to cool things down for everyone's sake?" For a moment, no one spoke. The man looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Daniel's tone made him pause. It wasn't confrontational or judgmental. It was measured, almost fatherly. Meanwhile, the woman gave Daniel a small nod of appreciation, though she remained silent. The man finally leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest. "Fine," he muttered, though his scowl suggested he wasn't done stewing. "But don't expect me to pretend I'm okay with this." "Nobody's asking you to," Daniel replied smoothly. "Just focus on getting through the flight. That's all any of us can do right now." With that, the immediate tension eased, though it was clear the underlying issues hadn't gone away. Passengers slowly returned to their books, phones, and conversations, grateful for the reprieve. The flight attendants resumed their duties, offering drinks and snacks with renewed smiles. Daniel settled back into his seat, relieved that the confrontation hadn't blown up further. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that there was more to this story than met the eye. Who were these two people, really? What had sparked such animosity between them? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, Daniel closed his eyes again, trying to relax. But deep down, he knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Something told him this flight was going to be anything but ordinary, and he wasn't wrong. This part builds on the tension introduced in part 1 while keeping the tone natural and engaging. Let me know if you'd like adjustments, or if you're ready to move on to part 3. The uneasy calm didn't last long. Just as Daniel began to drift off, lulled by the steady hum of the engines, a soft but urgent tap on his shoulder jolted him awake. He opened his eyes to see a flight attendant leaning in close, her face pale and tense. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment? It's important." Daniel sat up straight, instantly alert. Decades of flying had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about her tone set off alarm bells in his mind. Without hesitation, he unbuckled his seatbelt and followed her toward the front of the cabin. As they stepped aside near the galley, she glanced around to ensure no passengers were listening before speaking. "We've got a problem," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly. "The navigation system is malfunctioning. We've lost GPS and the pilots are struggling to stabilize the aircraft. They're asking if anyone on board has aviation experience who might be able to help." Daniel felt his stomach drop. A malfunctioning navigation system wasn't something to take lightly. It could mean the difference between a safe landing and disaster. But before he could respond, the plane shuddered slightly, causing both of them to grip the nearest surface for balance. Passengers looked up from their seats, murmuring nervously as the lights flickered briefly. "Stay calm," the flight attendant urged, though her own voice wavered. "We need to handle this carefully." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. He'd been in tough situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about him, it was about everyone on board. Taking a deep breath, he turned back toward his seat, knowing he couldn't waste another second. When he reached his row, the man in the suit and the woman across from him were already staring at him, their earlier argument forgotten in the face of the sudden turbulence. The man frowned as Daniel approached. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. "Why did that flight attendant pull you aside?" Before Daniel could answer, an announcement crackled over the intercom, cutting through the growing tension. The captain's voice was steady but clipped, clearly trying to reassure the passengers while acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, but our crew is working diligently to resolve the issue. Your safety is our top priority, and we appreciate your cooperation during this time." The words were meant to comfort, but they only heightened the anxiety in the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances, some clutching their armrests tightly while others whispered prayers under their breath. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to fear almost instantly. Daniel knelt down beside the man and the woman, lowering, his voice so only they could hear. "Listen," he said, his tone serious but calm. "There's a problem with the plane's navigation system. The pilots need help and I have aviation experience. I'm going to do what I can, but I need both of you to stay calm and follow instructions if things get worse." The man blinked, his earlier arrogance melting into concern. "Wait, you're a pilot?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes," Daniel replied simply. "And right now, that's all that matters. Can I count on you to cooperate?" The man hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. The woman, meanwhile, leaned forward, her expression sharp and focused. "What can we do to help?" she asked, her earlier composure returning. "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted, "but I'll let you know when I do." With that, he stood up and made his way toward the cockpit, leaving the two of them behind to process what was happening. As he walked down the narrow aisle, Daniel could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Some passengers looked hopeful, clinging to the idea that someone with experience might save the day. Others appeared terrified, gripping their loved ones or silently mouthing words of prayer. It was a heavy burden to carry, but Daniel pushed those thoughts aside. There was no room for doubt, not now. When he reached the cockpit door, a senior flight attendant greeted him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She ushered him inside, where the scene was chaotic. Alarms blared intermittently, and the co-pilot frantically worked the controls while the captain barked orders into the radio. Charts and manuals were spread across the dashboard, and the tension in the air was palpable. "What's the situation?" Daniel asked, wasting no time. Captain turned to him, his face etched with stress but also gratitude. "We've lost primary navigation systems. Backup is partially functional, but we're having trouble pinpointing our exact location. We're trying to reroute to the nearest airport, but without proper guidance." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Daniel understood the stakes perfectly. Every second counted and mistakes weren't an option. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer to the controls, ready to put his years of experience to the test. This part introduces the crisis, heightening the stakes and drawing the audience deeper into the story. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or if you're ready to move on to part 4. Daniel didn't waste a moment. He stepped up to the cockpit's control panel, his eyes scanning the instruments with practiced precision. The alarms were still blaring, but he blocked out the noise, focusing instead on the data in front of him. The captain and co-pilot moved aside slightly to give him space, their expressions a mix of desperation and cautious hope. "Talk me through what you've got so far," Daniel said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. His calm demeanor seemed to steady the room, if only for a moment. The co-pilot pointed to one of the screens. "We've lost GPS entirely, and the inertial navigation system is giving inconsistent readings. We're relying on old-school radio, beacons, but they're weak at this altitude. We think we're somewhere over Colorado, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's not enough." Daniel nodded, absorbing the information quickly. "Okay," he said, thinking aloud. "First, let's stabilize the plane. If we can maintain level flight, we'll buy ourselves time to figure out where we are and how to get down safely." He glanced at the captain, who gave him an approving nod. "Good idea," the captain replied. "I'll take care of communication with air traffic control. You focus on navigation." With that, Daniel rolled up his sleeves, literally and figuratively, and got to work. He began cross-referencing the sparse data from the radio beacons with the aircraft's last known position, before the systems failed. It was painstaking work, requiring both technical skill and sharp intuition. But Daniel had been in tight spots before, and he knew exactly how to piece together fragments of information to form a clearer picture. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the tension among passengers was growing unbearable. The turbulence had worsened, sending drinks spilling and luggage shifting in the overhead compartments. Some people clutched each other tightly, while others buried their faces in their hands, praying silently. Near the front of the plane, the man in the suit and the woman sat rigidly in their seats, gripping the armrests as the aircraft rocked unpredictably. The man turned to the woman, his earlier hostility replaced by raw fear. Do you think we're going to make it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For once, there was no trace of arrogance, just vulnerability. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We have to believe we will," she said, her tone steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "That guy, they said he's a pilot, right? He looked like he knew what he was doing." The man exhaled shakily, leaning back in his seat. "Yeah, I guess so." He paused, glancing at her. "Look, about earlier. I'm sorry. None of that matters now." To his surprise, the woman offered a faint smile. "It's okay. Let's just focus on getting through this." Their brief exchange was interrupted by another announcement over the intercom. This time it was Daniel's voice, calm but firm, addressing the passengers directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We're working hard to resolve the issue and ensure a safe landing. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. I'll keep you updated as we go along." His words brought a small measure of comfort to the anxious crowd. Even though the situation was dire, hearing someone sound so composed helped ease some of the panic. Passengers exchanged relieved glances, whispering words of encouragement to one another. Back in the cockpit, the team worked tirelessly to regain control of the aircraft. Daniel called out instructions to the co-pilot, who relayed them to the captain. Together they adjusted the plane's heading, using the faint signals from the radio beacons to guide them toward the nearest airport. Each step forward felt like a victory, even if progress was slow and uncertain. At one point, the captain leaned over to Daniel, his voice low but urgent. "We're running out of fuel faster than expected. If we don't find a place to land sooner..." "We'll find it," Daniel interrupted, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Keep pushing forward. We've come too far to give up now." As the minutes ticked by, the crew managed to stabilize the plane enough to attempt a descent. The nearest airport was still miles away, but they had no choice but to aim for it. Daniel calculated the angle and speed needed for a safe approach, double-checking every detail to avoid any mistakes. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was really only 20 minutes, the outline of a runway appeared in the distance. The sight sent a wave of relief through the cockpit, but Daniel reminded himself that the hardest part was yet to come: landing the plane without full navigation support. "Prepare for touchdown," he instructed, his voice steady. "We're going to do this together." Behind him, the captain and co-pilot nodded, their faces set with determination. Outside the cockpit window, the runway grew closer with each passing second. Passengers in the cabin braced themselves, gripping whatever they could find as the wheels touched down with a jarring thud. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, as the plane slowed and came to a stop, cheers erupted throughout the cabin. People hugged strangers, cried tears of joy, and applauded the crew who had somehow pulled off the impossible. But for Daniel, the relief was short-lived. As he stepped out of the cockpit, he saw the man in the suit and the woman waiting. For him, their expressions a mix of gratitude and awe. Little did he know this was just the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever. This part keeps the suspense high while introducing moments of human connection and teamwork. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or if you're ready to move on to part. As the plane came to a full stop on the runway, the sound of applause filled the cabin. It started softly, almost hesitantly, but quickly grew into a thunderous wave of gratitude. Passengers hugged each other, some wiping away tears while others laughed in sheer relief. The flight attendants stood by their seats smiling through their own exhaustion, knowing they had played a crucial role in keeping everyone calm during the ordeal. Daniel emerged from the cockpit, his face pale but composed. He hadn't expected such an outpouring of emotion, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed. Dozens of passengers called out to him, "Thank you. You saved us," as he made his way down the aisle toward the exit. He nodded politely, offering quiet words of reassurance. "We got lucky," he said repeatedly, deflecting praise even though it was clear he deserved every bit of it. When he reached the front of the cabin, the man in the suit and the woman were waiting for him. Both looked shaken but deeply grateful. The man stepped forward first, extending his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If it weren't for you—" Daniel shook his hand, firmly cutting him off gently. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "Everyone did their part, including you two." The woman chimed in, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What you did back there, it was incredible. You stayed so calm under pressure. I can't imagine what that must have been like." Daniel shrugged modestly, brushing off the compliment. "Just doing my job," he said simply. But inside, he couldn't deny the weight of what had happened. For years, he'd flown planes, always aware of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. Yet today had been different. It wasn't just about flying, it was about leadership, quick thinking, and teamwork. And somehow, against all odds, they'd pulled it off. The group paused near the exit as ground crew members boarded the plane to assist passengers in disembarking. Outside, emergency vehicles waited nearby, their flashing lights casting a surreal glow across the tarmac. News vans were already arriving at the scene, eager to cover the dramatic landing. Reporters shouted questions from behind barricades, trying to get a glimpse of the heroes who had saved the day. As Daniel stood there, watching people file off the plane one by one, he noticed something unusual. The man in the suit seemed hesitant to leave. Instead of heading toward the exit, he lingered, glancing nervously at the woman beside him. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke up. "There's something I need to say," he began, his tone unusually subdued. "Before this whole thing happened, I was angry. Furious, actually, at what you wrote about me." He gestured toward the woman. "But now, I realize how petty that was, none of it matters anymore, not compared to what we just went through." The woman blinked, clearly caught off guard by his admission. "I appreciate that," she said slowly, her voice tinged with surprise. "But I meant what I said earlier. I wasn't attacking you, personally. My work is important to me and I stand by it." "I understand that now," the man replied quickly, holding up a hand to stop her. "And honestly, maybe you're right. Maybe my company has made mistakes, if so." He swallowed hard, looking visibly uncomfortable. "If so, then I owe it to myself, and to everyone else, to fix them." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel watched silently, intrigued by the sudden shift in dynamics. Just hours ago, these two had been locked in a bitter argument, ready to tear each other apart. Now they were standing side by side, talking openly about accountability and change. It was a stark reminder of how life-altering moments could reshape perspectives. The woman studied the man carefully, weighing his sincerity. After a moment, she nodded. "If you mean that, if you're willing to take real steps to make things right, then I'll do everything I can to help." The man looked genuinely surprised by her offer. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice softening. "After everything?" Because that's why I do what I do, she answered simply. Not to destroy people, but to hold them accountable, and to give them a chance to do better. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man extended his hand tentatively, and the woman accepted it without hesitation. Their handshake was firm, a silent agreement forged in the aftermath of shared fear and survival. Daniel watched the exchange with a quiet sense of satisfaction. These two strangers, brought together by circumstance, had found common ground where none had existed before. It was a powerful reminder of humanity's capacity for growth, even in the most unlikely situations. As the last of the passengers disembarked, Daniel turned to follow them, pausing only to glance back at the plane. The aircraft that had nearly become a tragedy now stood as a symbol of resilience and collaboration. What had started as a tense confrontation between two individuals had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the strength of working together when it mattered most. Outside, reporters swarmed the survivors, thrusting microphones into their faces and firing off rapid-fire questions. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. Amidst the chaos, Daniel spotted the man and the woman standing close together, answering questions side by side. From the snippets of conversation he overheard, it sounded like they were sharing their story, not just of the emergency landing, but of the unexpected bond they had formed along the way. Daniel smiled faintly, feeling a strange mix of pride and humility. This wasn't the kind of heroics he'd ever imagined for himself, but it was meaningful nonetheless. As he walked away, from the scene blending into the crowd, he knew one thing for certain: life had a funny way of teaching lessons no classroom ever could. And sometimes those lessons came wrapped in turbulence. This part focuses on character development and emotional resolution, tying together threads from earlier sections while setting up the stage for the final twists. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or if you're ready to move on to part 6. The media frenzy outside the airport was intense. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, their cameras flashing like strobe lights as passengers filed past them. Some people stopped briefly to give interviews, recounting their harrowing experience in breathless tones. Others kept walking, eager to put the ordeal behind them and reunite with loved ones. Daniel stayed out of the spotlight, intentionally hanging back as the crowd thinned. He wasn't looking for recognition or praise. He just wanted to process everything that had happened. But even as he tried to fade into the background, his presence didn't go unnoticed. A young journalist spotted him lingering near the terminal doors and approached cautiously, microphone in hand. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice polite but insistent. "Are you the pilot who helped land the plane? Can we talk to you for a moment?" Daniel hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape route. He wasn't used to being in front of the camera, and the thought of answering questions made him uneasy. Still, he knew it was important to acknowledge what had happened, not for himself, but for everyone else on board. With a resigned sigh, he nodded. "Sure," he said simply. "But keep it quick." The journalist smiled gratefully and gestured for him to step closer. As soon as the camera rolled, she launched into her questions. "What went through your mind when you realized there was a problem with the plane?" she asked. "And how did you manage to help bring it down safely?" Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Honestly, I didn't have time to think about it too much," he admitted. "When something like that happens, you just focus on doing whatever needs to be done." The crew in the cockpit, they were amazing. They worked non-stop to keep us steady, and I was just there to lend a hand where I could. His modesty only seemed to endear him further to the growing audience. Passers-by slowed down to listen, nodding appreciatively at his humility. Even the journalist seemed charmed by his straightforward demeanor. "And what about the passengers?" she pressed. "How did they react during such a terrifying situation?" "They handled it better than anyone could expect," Daniel replied, glancing toward the man in the suit and the woman who were still surrounded by reporters. "People came together when it mattered most. That's what got us through. It wasn't just one person. It was everyone." His answer drew murmurs of agreement from those nearby. It was clear that the shared experience had created a sense of unity among the survivors, a bond forged in fear and gratitude. As Daniel wrapped up his brief interview, he noticed the man and the woman finishing theirs as well. Their body language spoke volumes. They were standing closer now, shoulders almost touching, speaking in hushed tones as though finally seeing each other as allies rather than adversaries. Curious, Daniel wandered over to join them after the journalists dispersed. Both looked exhausted but oddly lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The man glanced up first, spotting Daniel approaching. "Hey," he said, managing a small smile. "Looks like we're all celebrities now." Daniel chuckled softly. "Not exactly my idea of fun," he admitted. "But I guess it comes with the territory." The woman laughed too, though it was tinged with nervousness. "I never expected any of this," she confessed, gesturing vaguely at the chaos around them. "One minute I'm arguing with you." She nodded toward the man. "And the next, we're fighting for our lives. It's surreal." "It is," the man agreed, his tone unusually reflective. "But maybe that's the point. Life has a way of reminding us what really matters." He paused, looking directly at her. "I meant what I said earlier. I want to make things right. Not because I feel guilty, but because it's the right thing to do." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. For the first time since Daniel had met him, the arrogance and defensiveness were gone, replaced by genuine determination. The woman studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's start fresh. No more hostility, no more blame games, just honesty moving forward." Their agreement felt monumental, not just for them but for everyone watching. Daniel couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not because he had orchestrated their reconciliation, but because he'd witnessed it firsthand. These two strangers, brought together by fate, had chosen to rise above their differences in the wake of adversity. It was a powerful reminder of humanity's resilience. As the trio stood there, chatting quietly amidst the chaos, another figure approached them, a representative from the airline. Dressed in a crisp uniform, she carried herself with professionalism, though her expression betrayed a hint of exhaustion. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Daniel. "The airline would like to thank you personally for your actions today. We'd also like to offer you a formal position on our team, if you're interested." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. "A position?" he repeated, unsure how to respond. "Doing what?" "As a senior advisor for flight safety," she explained. "Your expertise and your calm under pressure is exactly what we need to improve protocols and prevent incidents like this in the future." The proposal was tempting, but Daniel hesitated. He had spent years flying planes, relishing the freedom and solitude it offered. Could he really trade that for a desk job? Before he could answer, the man in the suit chimed in unexpectedly. "You should take it," he said earnestly. "If anyone deserves it, it's you. And honestly, the aviation industry needs people like you. People who care about getting things right." To Daniel's surprise, the woman nodded in agreement. "He's right," she added. "This isn't just about one flight. It's about making sure everyone gets home safely every single time." For a moment, Daniel said nothing, weighing the decision in his mind. Then, with a slow smile, he extended his hand to the airline representative. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." As the group parted ways, each heading home to begin processing the day's events, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The emergency landing had changed all of them, not just individually, but collectively. And while the road ahead might be uncertain, one thing was clear. Sometimes life's greatest challenges brought out the best in us. This part focuses on wrapping up key emotional arcs while setting the stage for the final twist. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or if you're ready for part. Weeks passed since that fateful flight, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for everyone involved. The media coverage had died down, replaced by quieter conversations about resilience, teamwork, and second chances. For Daniel, the man, in the suit and the woman, the experience lingered. not as a memory of fear, but as a turning point that reshaped their lives in ways they never expected. Daniel threw himself into his new role at the airline, working tirelessly to improve safety protocols. He spent hours reviewing data, consulting with engineers, and training pilots on emergency procedures. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave him purpose, a chance to ensure no one else would face the same terror he'd witnessed on that turbulent flight. His colleagues quickly came to respect him not just for his expertise, but for his humility and dedication. "You're making a real difference," one of them told him during a meeting. "People like you remind us why we do this job." Meanwhile, the man in the suit returned to his company with a renewed sense of responsibility. True to his word, he began implementing changes, starting with an internal investigation into the practices the woman had exposed in her article. At first, his board members resisted, accusing him of being reckless or naive, but he held firm, arguing that transparency was the only way forward. Slowly but surely, he won them over, introducing initiatives to reduce environmental harm and increase accountability. News outlets picked up the story, praising him for taking bold steps toward reform. Critics remained skeptical, but even they couldn't deny the sincerity behind his actions. As for the woman, she found herself at a crossroads. Her article had sparked widespread attention, leading to invitations to speak at conferences and interviews on major news networks. Yet, despite the recognition, she felt conflicted. Writing exposés had always been her passion, but now she wondered if there was more she could do. One evening, while scrolling through emails, she stumbled upon a message from the man in the suit. It was brief but heartfelt. "I know we started off on the wrong foot, but I want you to see the changes we're making firsthand. Would you consider coming to visit our headquarters? Your perspective could help guide us." She stared at the screen for a long time, weighing the offer. Part of her wanted to decline. It felt strange to trust someone who had once dismissed her work so harshly, but another part of her recognized an opportunity to make a real impact. After some deliberation, she replied, "I'll come, but only if you promise to listen." The visit marked the beginning of an unlikely partnership. Over coffee and long meetings, the two hashed out ideas for sustainable business practices, ethical reforms, and community outreach programs. Their dynamic shifted entirely. They weren't adversaries anymore, they were collaborators. The tension between them dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and shared goals. "We might have started as enemies," the man joked one afternoon, "but now I think we make a pretty good team." Word of their collaboration spread, inspiring others to follow suit. Companies across industries began reaching out, asking for advice on how to implement similar changes. Journalists praised the woman for her willingness to engage rather than attack, while executives credited the man for his courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Together, they proved that progress was possible, even when it seemed impossible. Back at the airline, Daniel continued pushing for innovation. His efforts led to the development of advanced navigation systems designed to prevent future malfunctions. Pilots underwent rigorous training simulations based on scenarios like the one he'd faced, ensuring they were prepared for anything. When the updated systems rolled out nationwide, Daniel received a standing ovation at the unveiling ceremony. "This isn't my achievement," he insisted, deflecting praise as usual. "It's ours. We did this together." But perhaps the most surprising twist came months later, when the three of them reunited unexpectedly. An aviation conference brought them all to the same city, where they crossed paths during a panel discussion on crisis management. Sitting side by side on stage, they shared their story, how a heated argument had turned into a fight for survival, which in turn had sparked personal growth and meaningful change. The audience listened intently, moved by their honesty and vulnerability. When the session ended, the trio stayed behind to answer questions from attendees. One young aspiring pilot approached Daniel, visibly nervous. "What advice would you give someone like me?" he asked. "How do you stay calm when everything goes wrong?" Daniel smiled warmly, leaning in slightly. "You focus on what you can control," he said. And you trust the people around you. No one gets through life alone. We all need each other, especially in tough times. The comment resonated deeply, drawing nods of agreement from both the man and the woman. As they stood together afterward, reflecting on how far they'd come, they realized something profound. None of this would have happened without that chaotic, terrifying flight. It had forced them to confront their flaws, lean on one another, and discover strength they didn't know they had. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about finding common ground, embracing change, and proving that even in the darkest moments, humanity has a way of shining through. And as they walked away from the conference hall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they'd carry those lessons with them forever. This final part ties everything together, emphasizing growth, reconciliation, and the ripple effects of their actions. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks.